Ms. Howard, I want to give you an opportunity to talk about the IT challenges that the IRS has and what you're dealing with. What sort of software are you dealing with, and how bad is it?
Well, I think, I believe it was Congressman Carter when he was speaking, referred to the fact that he had an opportunity to go onto a search engine on his personal computer. He put in a few keywords that had to do with FOIA. He pushed a button and he got all kinds of responses. That's just not the way it works in IRS. We don't have that library of electronic documents that we can go in and search through a Google or Bing or any of the other search engines that you might have. We need the ability to actually tag those records so that we know what they are, who created them, how they're created.
Can you do keyword searches?
We can do keyword searches within accounts. So that means if you're going to look for emails, I would have to look at your account, my account, anyone's account that might be involved, account by account, and then look within each of those emails.
You can't do a massive look into...
It involves downloading everything into some sort of massive database.
What software do you use?
And that would be a question for the IT person or the computer.
You don't know what software you use on your computer?
What software I use on my computer?
Yeah.
I have a Microsoft suite of products, including Outlook, Exchange.
So you use Outlook. Mm-hmm. You can't type a word into Outlook and search your database?
I can my own account.
We'll have to dive deeper into this. And I'd like actually if each of the 5 of you can help us understand how bad or how good you think the IT situation is.
But you know, I just want to add too, that once you get the documents, you still have to go through line by line by line to look for 6103 redactions and then the other exemptions within FOIA. So it's not just about the IT, but certainly that's a huge thing in IRS.
Ms. Newman, you mentioned the budget detail worksheet that would be released in June of this year, which be any time. Do you have that yet? And if so, can you provide it to this committee?
I do not have that yet. I will be happy to.
Sorry, you got to be a little closer to the mic there. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm not aware that it's been completed yet. I will check with my Deputy Chief FOIA Officer, and if it has, I will be happy to certainly
when
provide
it is complete, and you didn't represent that it was complete, but when it is complete, can you please share that with this committee? One of the questions we have is about the charges that are given to the public and the expenses that they have. Let me start with you. Let me go back to Ms. Howard here. Oftentimes people are frustrated because the law says you need to respond within 20 days. You can give another 10-day extension, but then oftentimes it's months before they hear again. How do you pick those dates?
I think mainly they're just an approximation of when we think the document production will be done. Certainly in the case of the C4 issues or the C4 cases, you know, we had just no idea the volume of documents that would be required and how long it would actually take for the responses to Congress and the investigators to be completed.
So when you do the search, you send a request out to anybody you think might have it, and you count on them to individually do it? You're not able to, you're not at a...
Yes,
there's not a FOIA officer that can get in there and do a search term, pull up every relevant email or document?
No, because there's no library. There's no massive.
Well, there is.
storage.
There isn't. This is a fallacy. It's wrong to say there's no library. It's called email. And the reason we moved away from carbon copies and big warehouses with stacks and volumes of file folders is because electronically you can push a button, do a search, and generate that. This is you know, the year 2015 here. We're not in the Stone Ages trying to knock something out and copy it on a stone. So don't tell me there's not a database. It's called email. And it's called Microsoft. They're a big company.
Folder by folder by folder by folder, account by account by account by account.
And it's magic. You get a 28-year-old IT person in there, and they can find that in a couple hours. And that's why we don't believe you. This is why we don't believe you. Don't say there's not a database. It's called email. Right? I mean...
My understanding is that the capabilities of the system we have do not enable us to do that except account by account by account.
And I just fundamentally and totally do not understand that. And I don't understand how you all pick dates. Can you please try to explain? We don't have time because, I mean, it would take you 10 minutes each to try to explain this. The frustration for so many people is they don't get exposure. They don't know when they, and sometimes they last months and years. Sometimes it's very legitimate. They need some exposure to that. but there seems to be this great deal of mystery as to why you say, well, it'll be July, and then July comes, and next thing you know, it's October, and it just seems like a slow walk. So can you help explain to us why you and how you pick the dates? I also would appreciate from Homeland Security if they could help us understand the new rulemaking that they're involved with FOIA. The FOIA law is the law, so why do you have to develop new rulemaking, and what in the world is that going to look like?
Are you asking me a question?
Yeah.
Yes. So the GAO report recommended that we finalize our interim FOIA regulation, which embodies FOIA policy and guidance at the department. The rulemaking process is underway. We are preparing to issue it for public comment, and after which we will review the comments very carefully, and the rule will be finalized.
We will be watching that, because if Homeland Security thinks that they're going to come up with a whole nother new set of rules that's different, this is, again, one of the frustrations. FOIA is what FOIA is, but every time you go to a different department and agencies, they got an old set of standards. They got different rules. They don't have standards where you just plug and play and operate equally, and that's a frustration.
And the rule is really an implementing regulation, is not intended, nor do I believe.
We're fascinated to see it. The other thing I'm terribly frustrated at is this, we talked about the scorecard, and I believe this is put out by the Department of Justice, right? You come in and do this evaluation, and there's a color-coded scheme here, and it's different categories of presumption of openness, effective system in place for responding, proactive disclosure, improved timeliness and backlog reduction.
Right.
And you know, if you sat and listened to some testimony of today and compare it to yesterday, I mean, we had as wide array of people as you can possibly have, from individuals to the New York Times, to the ACLU, to a former CBS News reporter, to Vice, I mean, we got as wide of a swatch of people as we possibly could. And there wasn't anybody that believed that in general, things were going well. And yet, when you do your own scorecard, for instance, at the Department of Justice, you're solid green. You gave yourself 5 out of 5 on presumption of openness, 5 out of 5 on an effective system in place for responding, proactive disclosure. Are you kidding me? The Department of Justice gives themselves a 5 out of 5 on proactive disclosure. You really think anybody in the world believes the Department of Justice is the most, they're at the top of their game? They got an A+, 5 for 5. Do you really believe that?
I do.
Man,
I absolutely do.
You live in la-la land. That's the problem.
I live in
You
the
live
real
in
world,
fantasy land because it ain't working. You're a very nice person, and I'm sure most of the people are very nice people. It ain't working. 550,000 times Americans put forward a request and got a rejection saying doesn't qualify. You think that's working? Is that a presumption of openness? Do you think that's proactive disclosure? I beg to differ. I think it's absolutely fundamentally wrong. We're at the heart of why I think there is a problem, because you all think you're doing a great job.
Right. We are constantly evaluating, not just how we do at DOJ.
And your evaluation says you have no room for improvement.
Oh, that's not true at all.
Then why do you give yourself 5 out of 5?
You aren't looking at the whole.
Yes,
all
I
the
am.
Different categories.
I'll go through each and every one of them. I just read the different disclosures, and here it is in green, all green.
We have green for proactive disclosures. Proactive disclosures are making available to the public information.
Presumption of openness?
Exactly. The
Effective system in place for responding.
Responding to requests.
Really? You got an effective system for... Look, we can argue about this. I beg to differ. We had 11, 12 people yesterday that absolutely differ. On a bipartisan way, I don't think there's anybody that would agree with you that across the board, most every one of you got great scores. And I just don't buy that. I want to ask specifically about the Department of Justice. Are you able to conduct an electronic search, or do you rely on the individual agency employees to proactively give you the information?
This, what you're talking about, I think, is a really important improvement to FOIA administration. And we do have within OIP the tools that are more sophisticated tools that are used in the e-discovery context, which allow individual email accounts to be dumped or be collected into one bucket.
So you search the universal index, is that right?
And, well, I don't think it's called a universal index, but we have tools that allow us to
The
search.
UNI?
We have tools that allow us to search multiple email custodians simultaneously. And we, in fact—
Do you search the electronic case files?
We do sometimes. It depends on what we would only search case files if case files were relevant to a particular FOIA request. You know, we have lots of different offices. What I want to emphasize is that technology is incredibly important to FOIA administration. And we've been at the forefront of pushing for use of more sophisticated technology to process and handle FOIA requests. We did a pilot at DOJ several years ago to show the benefits of being able to do things like searching multiple custodians at the same time.
Okay, so my understanding is that the FBI conducts a search on the, it does conduct searches on the Universal Index, but that system does not allow for text-based searches. But the FBI does not search the electronic case files, which contain uploaded versions of the Bureau's non-restricted investigative records, and the ECF, as it's called, the electronic case file, is text searchable, and that's the disconnect.
Right.
I don't expect you on this spot to respond to that, but I do want you to get back to us on this specific point, if you would.
Sure.
Okay. I have a few more questions, but I want you to kind of each go down the line here. We went through with Ms. Howard here, but let's go back to Ms. Barr. This is my last set of questions before I change my mind and ask another one. I want to know, what is the instruction that you believe you've been given to interact with the White House? What percentage of the documents do you give to the White House or somebody who represents the White House? What is the expectation that you share information with them? Do you need their approval before you send it back? How does that work? Because this directive is really concise, clear, short. It's 3 paragraphs. I mean, they essentially want you to give them everything. And so my question is, what do you have to do in order to fulfill the demand from the White House that you give them everything before you give it to us or to the media or to the judicial branch?
Well, we have a standard process that we follow for FOIA, and it does include, if the White House has an equity in a document that we're working on, we do consult with them as appropriate, but we follow the standard FOIA process.
How do you determine if it's a White House equity? I mean, what is not an equity?
What we do, when we get a request in, we have a team of reviewers, and many of these reviewers, because so much of our work deals with things overseas, for the most part they're retired Foreign Service officers, and some of them are even foreign ambassadors. In fact, we have quite a few. They look at it, we decide where we need to search for documents, and then once we get the results of that document search back, then we go through line by line, and at that point, we look at whether or not we need to coordinate with other agencies. And that would be when we would include the White House if, after they get these materials back, they decide that they have an interest in that document.
And who at the White House do you send them to?
I'm not familiar with who exactly, but
if you could let us know, we'd appreciate it. Ms. Boustay.
What I can tell you is that the process of consulting with other agencies, which would include the White House, has not changed. This memo reflects the same practice that we've had administration to administration. I've been doing this a long time. And the word equity is really just sort of a more modern term, but what is captured by the memo and what has been consistent from administration to administration is that when an agency finds communications that originated with another entity or that reflect a communication with the other entity, that's when an agency, as a matter of good practice, consults with that other entity to get their views on the sensitivity of the material. And oftentimes that can include, of course, getting their views that it's okay to release the material. So it's communications is what happens, the memo.
And I think it's a big source of why it's so slowed down. So what percentage of the information do you have to share to the White House before you share it with us?
Yeah, I can speak obviously just of FOIA requests. I don't know the percentage of requests that have the equity of any particular.
Okay, Ms. Newman?
Yes, it's my understanding with respect to the White House, this happens very infrequently.
Happens what?
Very infrequently. With DOJ.
Why? I mean, the memo says it should happen on everything.
Well, again, it's my understanding, and I don't process these requests or get involved in these kinds of consultations, but my understanding is that the kinds of requests we get don't involve, quote, White House equities. And of course, when the request comes in, there's if there's an indication that it is a request for White House records or White House information, that would trigger the consultation.
Well, no, it doesn't. So I'm not talking about White House. I'm saying if you have information in your possession at Homeland, and it comes from a member of Congress, the judicial branch, it was a FOIA request, a GAO request, that it should be shared with the White House.
And if we
You're telling
were
me
to
you
have
don't do that?
No, I'm saying that we do, we follow DOJ issue guidelines that require consultation not only with the White House.
Well, what about the White House issued guidelines? Because I'm reading to you the guidelines. We handed you a copy of them. This is the guideline. You don't abide by it, or you do abide by it?
And we adhere to this memo in accordance with the DOJ guidance on that. We also report all such consultations publicly in our FOIA reports. So you asked a question about whether these consultations slow down or create additional delay in the process. I've implemented some procedures to try to minimize that delay or a delay associated with any consultations, including directing a senior professional member of my FOIA team to be the point of contact for those consultations.
And they communicate with who at the White House?
I would have to ask them. I don't
We're not
know.
getting much. We'll try Mr. Fontenot.
Thank you. I do not process specific FOIA requests, but Treasury follows the Department of Justice guidance from 2011 concerning FOIA referrals and consultations. We consult with agencies and entities concerning documents that originated at those agencies or in communication with those agencies. And obviously, in this respect, Treasury may consult with staff from the Executive Office of the President or the White House when those documents either originate or relate to the White House. And so, again, we treat the White House just like any other agency related to FOIA.
You were on a roll. I was believing everything you said until you said that last sentence. You're nuts if you think you treat the White House exactly the same you treat the Bureau of Indian Affairs. There's no way that's happening. So with all due respect, we're trying to get our hands and a grip on it. We would like some feedback on this. I think the director from the White House is crystal clear, and we'll continue to pursue that. Well over time, we'll now recognize the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings, ranking member.